Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get started with our session, but even before we do our invocation, I would like to propose a moment of silence for Officer T.J. Bomba. The council offers its deep condolences to the family of Officer Thomas T.J. Bomba, who died yesterday after serving the Montgomery County community for more than 13 years. We ask that you keep Officer Bomba and his family in your thoughts and prayers in this time of grief. Let's observe a moment of silence for Montgomery County Police Officer Bomba. Please rise as you're able. Thank you. Now we have an invocation from Reverend Dr. Linda Olson Peoples from the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Rockville. If you don't mind standing again as you're able.
Thank you. Following that moment of silence of honoring and acknowledging a life given in service to us, I invite us now to have our hearts be opened and let our spirits be centered so that we can welcome into this place this morning the power that gives us life and sustains us in all we do, known by many names or by no name. Spirit of love, here we are, the product of sun and rain and earth. Here we are on land we did not create, and land that has been the home of so many before us. Piscataways, Senecas, Susquehannocks, European settlers, African slaves, their freed descendants, refugees from war and famine and oppression from around the globe. Generation after generation, people settling here, committed to life. We are here inheritors of the best and the worst of all that our ancestors gave us. And now we take responsibility for our world, inheritors of the responsibility that was taken through the actions and words of thousands of lives before us that we may or may not know. May we be grateful for all that we have received and for the history of this community now called Montgomery County. And may we be grateful for the privilege to serve as leaders and citizens and caretakers for this land and for all those people who live here now. And may we remember the ancestors who have struggled for justice, and in their memory, may we create together today another day in the history of a just future. Amen.
Thank you for those beautiful words. We will now start our presentations. We have our first presentation, which is a proclamation recognizing Domestic Violence Awareness Month by Council Vice President Katz.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for being with me. I'd like to invite the county executive, who got here right in the nick of time, and everyone else associated with the Domestic Violence Awareness Month proclamation to please join us. What I'm going to do is ask everyone to please identify yourselves.
Good morning, Jody Finkelstein, Executive Director of Montgomery County Commission for Women and the Montgomery County Human Trafficking Prevention Committee.
Donna Rojas, Montgomery County Commission for Women, First Vice President.
Trisha Swanson, Montgomery County Commission for Women.
Tom Mannion, Director of the Family Justice Center, Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. Teresa Bennett, Acting Chief, Behavioral Health and Crisis Services with Montgomery County Health and Human Services.
Sola Shaw, Domestic Violence Coordinating Council.
Ngozi Obidoman, Program Manager for the Family Justice Center, Montgomery County Sheriff's Office.
Lucy Font, Montgomery County Commission for Women.
Ingrid Gonzalez, Division of Parole and Probation, Silver Spring Field Office.
Spencer Cantrell, Legal Program Director for the Jewish Coalition Against Domestic Abuse.
Sergeant Andrew Sove, charge of Domestic Violence Unit.
Brian Roinstead, Captain of the Domestic Violence Section for the Sheriff's Office at the Family Justice Center.
And Lieutenant Robin Lewis, Family Justice Center, Sheriff's Office.
And I know we had one person over here who did not identify herself. Yeah.
Smita Varia, Program Manager, Domestic Violence Coordinating Council.
Thank you. Did you want to say a few words first? Well, October is recognized as Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Beginning in 1981, the National Coalition Against Domestic Abuse designated October as the Day of Unity to connect battered women's advocates nationwide. Domestic violence affects women and men and takes many different forms. It affects every race, religion, culture, and status. We have come a long way, especially in Montgomery County, in recognizing the many forms of domestic violence, providing services to victims, and in holding the offenders accountable. Our law enforcement, police, fire, rescue, sheriff, and the many, many partners we work with provide the services and help that is so very needed by victims of domestic violence in our community. Much of this that is provided is at the Family Justice Center, our one-stop shop for victims of domestic violence, which ably serves those in need now for 10 years. Statistics show that nearly 3 out of 4 people know someone who is or has been a victim of domestic violence. In order to break the cycle, we must speak up. Please join me and all the others with me today and every day in speaking up. County Executive.
There's not a lot to add to what Sydney said. This is really important. It affects a lot of people, far more people than we realize, because this is one of those crimes that people don't want to talk about. And so if you know somebody who's suffering silently, it's important that you help them find voice and help them find help. The cost of these programs to human beings is enormous, and the scars that people bear often last a lifetime. There are people who never get over what they experience, and they really do need the support that we can give them. And I know Dutchie's not here this morning, but it's inappropriate to recognize the work that Dutchie did to create the Family Justice Center, which I think is one of the gems of Montgomery County. I'm hoping that in the future we get to expand the trade-off centers, the handoff centers that we have. There's more that we can do, but this is, we've got a lot of support in this community. We've always had a lot of support on the council, and this is very, very important work.
Thank you very much. And we'd like to invite Tom, wherever he went, he was over there when I noticed, to receive the proclamation. And Mark, if you would help me read, would you like to start?
Sure. We practiced this the other night.
Yeah, we did. Not on this one.
Whereas, on average, 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States. In 1 year, this equates to more than 10 million men and women, and
1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have been the victim of some form of physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. 1 in 3 adolescents is a victim of physical, sexual, emotional, or verbal abuse from a dating partner, and 1 in 15 children are exposed to domestic violence each year. And
October is National Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and the Montgomery County Family Justice Center, located in Rockville, Maryland, offers free confidential services to women, men, and children impacted by domestic violence. And
information about the Family Justice Center is available online, in courthouses, on ride-on buses, and in the community centers throughout the county. And the simple message, "Are you afraid of your partner? Free help is available," is published in 16 different languages to reach members of community of our community from diverse backgrounds, and
the Montgomery County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council offers education and resources for community members, including Choose Respect Montgomery, a teen dating violence prevention initiative, so that together we can reduce the incidence of domestic violence in Montgomery County through public awareness.
now, therefore, do we, Mark Elrich as County Executive, and Nancy Navarro as Council President, and Sidney Katz, Council Vice President, hereby proclaim the month of October 2019 as Domestic Violence Awareness Month in Montgomery County. We ask our community to recognize the pervasive problem of domestic violence, to support our friends and families in the process of seeking services, and to spread the word about the help available at the Family Justice Center. Would you like to take this, please? Take this, please. We're going to put this back in here. I guess we'll move that. Did you want to say a few words? Sure, please. Go ahead.
Photos or?
Wait, we'll move this one.
Okay. Go ahead and say.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Sheriff Popkin was unfortunately unable to be here today, but he wanted me to extend the sincerest gratitude and appreciation from the Sheriff's Office to our County Council and to our County Executive for all of your support over the years for the Family Justice Center and for families in Montgomery County who are experiencing family violence, and for being true partners in this fight that we're fighting to keep people safe and hold offenders accountable. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Now we have a proclamation recognizing Montgomery Housing Partnership's 30th year anniversary by Councilmember Glass and County Executive Mark Elrich.
Good morning. I would like to invite County Executive back up, and also anyone who's here from MHP, Rob Goldman, President. Good to see you. Good morning. Hi. So I'll start by saying before serving on the council, I had the honor of serving on the board of Montgomery Housing Partnership and was most recently the vice chair of the board. And of all the different groups I've had the pleasure of working with and doing good work here in Montgomery County, it was Montgomery Housing Partnership that always held a special place in my heart because of the holistic approach that it takes to building communities, building affordable communities, not only from being the county's largest nonprofit developer of affordable housing and helping create the actual infrastructure, but to providing after-school programs, to providing computer labs so adults can improve their skills so that they can leave Montgomery Housing Partnership and the apartments that we provide, that they provide, and find other housing and become homeowners. And that transition rate is a spectacular thing. And the staff and the board and everybody in the community that supports them are just doing tremendous work to provide housing for everybody here in Montgomery County at all different levels. County Executive.
I just want to thank you and MHP for all the work you've done over all the years. You are probably the premier and go-to organization, usually first at the table in trying to provide affordable housing in the county. And it is absolutely true that you provide the wraparound services, and your work in that area is really important because people don't escape poverty simply by providing them a house. They also need supportive activities that help support their children when their parents are working, but also help support the parents so they can move up the ladder and hopefully not need affordable housing the same way, in order to be able to enter the market. So I think the work you do is is really important and a good wrap around the needs of the county.
Well, thank you for this honor. I appreciate it. And I really, about the work we do is about partnership, and that's where our name comes about. And we really can't do it without the support of the county executive and the county council, and they've been with us every step of the way. So, as has been said, we been serving low-income families for 30 years, and it's not just about providing housing. It's about providing, empowering the residents that live at our properties with the various programs talked about, preschool programs, after-school programs for elementary school kids, and various programs for adults, as well as strengthening neighborhoods around where affordable housing is located. And so this is a momentous time. We've developed over 2,100 units of housing throughout the area, and it's really through all the support from everyone. So thank you very much.
Okay. So, the proclamation. The Montgomery County Housing Partnership, made up of 33 hardworking individuals passionate about providing affordable housing, has strived to maintain and increase quality housing in Montgomery County since 1989 and is currently serving more than 1,750 residents.
And whereas for 30 years, MHP has been a leader in providing quality affordable housing, having created and preserved more than 1,700 affordable housing apartments, condos, and townhomes in the county. And
MHP has also worked to enhance the vitality and vibrancy of neighborhoods through physical improvements to property and infrastructure, public art, outreach, organizing, in collaboration with community leaders and small businesses.
And whereas MHP takes a holistic approach to housing that goes beyond the basic need for shelter by empowering families through its community life programs, which offer educational programs for youth and adults, including job training, home ownership classes, assistance with tax preparation, health fairs, and award-winning before and after-school enrichment programs that have increased students' academic performance and readiness for kindergarten. Now, therefore, do we, Mark Elrich as County Executive, Nancy Navarro as Council President, and myself, Evan Glass, as Council Member, hereby honor and congratulate Montgomery Housing Partnership for its continuing work and invaluable role in providing affordable and quality housing for the residents of Montgomery County.
Okay. Thanks.
Congratulations. Okay. So now we will proceed with a proclamation recognizing National Disability Employment Awareness Month by myself and County Executive Elrich. So don't leave yet, Mark. Those of you who are here for this proclamation, please join us. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you? Good morning. ¿Cómo estás?
Muy bien, gracias.
Me alegro. All right. Let's see, we may have to do, 2 rows so we can all be in the, yeah. Yeah, come on over. We have some room on this side too. Alicia? All right, welcome. So today I am honored to be joined by Executive Elrich and our community partners in recognizing National Disability Employment Awareness Month. Equity in employment is a value we in Montgomery County hold dear, and I am proud to help represent a county which is willing to do the legwork to truly demonstrate who we are as a community. Montgomery County government partners with private, public, and nonprofit entities to address the high rates of unemployment among people with disabilities through innovative career training and development programs. To all our partners, we say thank you for your continued work, and I hope to see all of you here again next year celebrating. We take pride in Montgomery County being a model for other jurisdictions when it comes to incorporating individuals with disabilities into our workforce and providing opportunities for traditionally underserved communities of all types. We hope to continue to innovate and create a workforce that has room for any and all individuals willing to put in the effort, regardless of disability status. When these communities are given the tools to succeed, we all succeed. County Executive.
So this is actually personal for me. I think some people know I've got a Down syndrome foster son. He's now 53 years old. And he works or doesn't work depending on the availability of jobs for disabled people in the community. And, for probably more often than not during his life, he didn't work. And his problems are just like a microcosm of what so many folks in the community face. It is very hard to get employment. It's very important that we have the ability to provide supported employment. I know we have obstacles at the state. There are new regulations coming down from the state that can make this task even harder for people in the community and nonprofits to find employment for people who need employment. So it's important that Montgomery County does what it does. It's important that we look at our programs and opportunities to make them stronger, but it's also important that we support the folks, the nonprofits in the community who do this work, and that also we have a presence in the state to make sure that whatever policies they adopt are actually in the best interest of the clients that everybody is serving. So I want to thank you all for everything you do and everything you make possible.
Would you like to make some remarks, and then we'll read the proclamation?
You know me, I'm going to talk.
Okay, yeah, I know you're going to talk.
Well,
Okay.
I'd like to just say just a
Oh, you want to say
Yes,
something?
yeah,
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, that'll be quick. Okay, well, thank you very much, Ami. Thank you so much. Well, now I'm with the National Federation of the Blind and Sligo Creek chapter. I'd just like to thank Council President Navarro and County Executive Elrich and the rest of the members of the County Council for their diligent work on providing people with employment with disabilities. And it's important that we include businesses that we hire, that we have businesses who want to hire people with disabilities. I just want to really thank them for their diligent work. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
On behalf of the Commission on People with Disabilities, I want to thank you both and the entire County Council for this proclamation. It's important to remember, though, we still have a way to go. At this juncture, we have an unemployment rate of 11.1% amongst people with disabilities aged 18 to 64 who are not institutionalized. These are people who want work, who are looking for work, and they cannot get it. So it's very high. Nationally, the rate is 8%. So we've got a bit of work to do, and I realize that it can't be just the county, and I appreciate the fact that this has to be collaboration between the county and the private employers of the county to try and enhance the employment of people with disabilities. Thank you.
So we'll read the proclamation. Whereas the theme for National Disability Employment Awareness Month this year is the right talent, right now. We celebrate the many contributions of people with disabilities that people with disabilities make to our community and the enriching diversity they bring to the workplace. And whereas Montgomery County partners with public and nonprofit organizations and private businesses in innovative ways to address the high unemployment rates of individuals with disabilities by providing more inclusive career development and training programs, which lead to increased levels of competitive integrated employment in jobs with dignity of meaningful work. And
Montgomery County strives to be a model for local jurisdictions and private sector employers as evidenced by the county's hiring preference for veterans and people with disabilities, including veterans with service-related disabilities, public internship program, Project Search, WorkSource Montgomery, Montgomery County Public Schools, Montgomery College, and our many contractual partnerships with nonprofit organizations. And we celebrate employers who promote workplace access for individuals with disabilities as a critical commitment to build a community that is inclusive, equitable, and promotes social justice and opportunities for each person to be successful in the workplace.
Now, therefore, do I, Mark Elrich, as County Executive, well, him, and Nancy Navarro as Council President, hereby proclaim the month of October 2019 as National Disability Employment Awareness Month in Montgomery County. We commend this observance to all our residents and urge employers to hire, retain, and advance qualified employees who have a disability. And it's signed by County Executive Mark Elrich and myself, Nancy Navarro, as Council President. Congratulations, and thank you for everything that all of you do every day. I'll give this to you, and we'll take a photo. You're going to take a picture. Oh, my colleagues can stand. We just don't have enough room over here. So our next proclamation is for Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And for this proclamation, I would like to invite Mr. and Mrs. Moneymaker, and I think that also we have the director of our HHS department, I believe, Dr. Kroll, can come over. And I want to thank all of you who wore pink today. How are you? Okay, so as everyone knows, October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. This is an annual worldwide campaign involving thousands of organizations to highlight the importance of breast cancer awareness, education, and research. This year, I would like to dedicate this proclamation to my own younger sister, Aldred Elizabeth Navarro, who passed away in 2010 of breast cancer, as well as all the very, very amazing, brave men and women who have suffered from this disease and have left us too soon. Currently, there is not enough knowledge on the causes of breast cancer. Therefore, early detection of the disease remains the cornerstone of breast cancer control. When breast cancer is detected early and if adequately diagnosed and treated, there is a good chance that breast cancer can be cured. Today, not only do we honor those past and present fighters, what I call warriors of the light of this disease, but we are also grateful to the friends, family advocates, healthcare professionals, and organizations like For Three Sisters that support women and men going through the difficult journey of being diagnosed with breast cancer. In Montgomery County, through the county's HHS department, we provide free mammograms and follow-up care to eligible participants. And we also have a strong network of programs like those in the Minority Health Initiatives, as well as the nonprofit and private business sectors supporting this life-altering work. Before I hand it over to Marshall Moneymaker, a retired county fire and rescue services firefighter, I will briefly say that For Three Sisters was founded by him and his wife, Shannon, and I would like for them to share exactly what motivated them to start this amazing organization and the story behind the Pink Fireman. So I'll turn it over to you first.
Thank you. What an honor, not only to be recognized by the county government, but to share the spotlight with some other wonderful organizations in the community. As a career firefighter, I lost 3 sisters to breast cancer, Vicki, Penny, and Valessa. I got involved telling the story, volunteering for some other organizations, and I guess my shift mates were so impressed with what I was doing that they presented me with the pink fire gear. It was supplied by the supplier who supplies our gear. It's the real stuff, dyed pink. It was done so in front of the media, and they started calling me the pink firefighter, and one thing led to another, and I approached my wife Shannon and begged her to start a nonprofit and do help within the community. After serving so many years as a firefighter in the community and fulfilling that desire to help, starting in Montgomery County Public Schools as a cadet firefighter and work all the way through, I pledged from here on out as the pink firefighter that no one in Montgomery County or elsewhere will fight breast cancer alone.
Shannon, would you like to make some remarks? Tell us a little bit about the work that you do now.
I appreciate it. Shorter people.
I'm Shannon Moneymaker. I'm the executive director and co-founder of 4-3 Sisters, and I thank the county council and the county executive for the proclamation and recognizing the work that we're doing in the community. 1 in 8 women will be diagnosed with breast cancer in their lifetime, and 1 in 1,000 men will be diagnosed with breast cancer in their lifetime. And a breast cancer diagnosis brings an unbelievable and extraordinary burden to men and women and their families who are both fighting and surviving the disease. So 4-3 Sisters is very proud of the work we do in the community. We provide access to breast health procedures, mammograms, early detection procedures, but more importantly, we provide assistance and support to men and women and their families who are both fighting and surviving the disease.
That's good. Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Cole, would you like to share some thoughts on what we do here in the county?
Thank you. I'm honored to be here with you, President Navarro, and with the representation from 3 Sisters, and pleased to be able to stand here today in support of this proclamation and to pledge HHS's continued support for fighting and combating breast cancer in Montgomery County, Maryland. There will be 3 million people diagnosed with, or who will have been diagnosed with breast cancer this year across the country. This is also personal for me. I've lost friends to breast cancer. I've had friends who've struggled with this and succeeded. So for me, this is an honor of a friend, Jean Sendab, whom I lost many years ago. And it's a moment to keep her in my heart and to support this cause. So thank you.
And I have to say that, in many ways, this is always a bittersweet celebration. There is a part of me that has to smile because it is important to remember our loved ones in their full glory and all that they did and the joy that they brought to each of us. But it's also really tough because it's kind of like you're part of a club that you never really want to be a part of. And organizations like 4-3 Sisters are so important because knowing also personally the grief that goes around and the impotence that you feel when a loved one is going through something like this, and in my case it was my younger sister, it was even tougher. These kinds of organizations provide an extraordinary element of support, of hope, of also relief for family members when they don't know what to do. And it's all has to be a collaborative effort with, of course, the healthcare professionals, the organizations, all coming together in the family to provide as much support. In her case, she fought for 8 years. But I know that, her memory lives on, obviously, in our hearts, just like all of our relatives who have passed or our friends who have passed of this horrible disease. So let me read this proclamation. Whereas October is National Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and since the program began in 1985, there has been a gradual reduction in female breast cancer in women age 50 and older, and death rates have declined since 1990 due to better screening, early detection, increased awareness, and continually improving treatment options. And whereas in the United States, more than 268,000 women and approximately 2,600 men are diagnosed with breast cancer annually, 1 in 8 or 12% of women will develop breast cancer at some point in her life, making breast cancer the most common cancer among women except for skin cancer. And whereas Montgomery County is fortunate to have many partners such as For Three Sisters across various disciplines that raise awareness about the importance of early detection of breast cancer and provide services to those who have been diagnosed with breast cancer. And whereas For Three Sisters was founded by Shannon and Marshall Moneymaker in memory of Marshall's three sisters and continues to raise awareness and provide support for breast cancer survivors and fighters, both men and women. And whereas this month we stand with the mothers, daughters, sisters, aunts, and friends who have been affected by breast cancer, and we recognize the ongoing efforts of dedicated advocates, researchers, and healthcare providers who strive each day to defeat this terrible disease. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland hereby recognizes October 2019 as Breast Cancer Awareness Month in Montgomery County and recognizes the contribution of For Three Sisters and all of those who help prevent, detect, and treat cancer and who work toward a future free from cancer in all forms. Presented this 15th day of October in 2019, signed by myself, Nancy Navarro, as Council President. And I would like to invite my colleagues to come forward because I know that each of them has had some kind of connection to this terrible disease, and we all stand together here today presenting this proclamation. All right, now on to general business. Let me ask Ms. Lauer if there are any announcements.
Yes, we do have several announcements. The two committee meetings that were rescheduled from yesterday afternoon will be conducted this afternoon. And it'll be done in this room. The plan was upstairs, but we've moved it to this room. The T&E GO will be at 3 o'clock, and the T&E committee will begin at 3:45. There's also an announcement that we have the location of a public hearing. The Forest Glen Montgomery Hills Sector Plan will be held in this room in the council office building at 7:30 on November 12th. There were no petitions. We also, when we get to introduction of bills, on Bill 3319, Community Policing, Councilmember Friedson has been asked to be added as a co-sponsor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So the minutes of September 17th have been circulated. Are there any changes? Hearing none, those are now adopted. Okay, so I need a motion for item 2, consent calendar.
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember Katz and second by Councilmember Friedson. I don't see any lights. All right, so all those in favor, please raise your hand. That is unanimous. Wonderful. Okay, right on time. So now we're going to move on to item number 3. And this is a briefing on the Metropolitan Washington Council of Government report, The Future of Housing in Greater Washington, a regional initiative to create housing opportunities, improve transportation, and support economic growth. And also the the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments regional housing targets. Welcome, welcome. Welcome, everybody. I want to thank everybody for being here today. I had the opportunity to serve in the Housing Strategy Work Group for the Council of Governments. And basically, this was an attempt to take a deep dive into the regional housing needs, taking into consideration many of the different opportunities and also potential that we have here in the region, but also recognizing how to address a significant component that is tied to quality of life, that is tied to economic vibrancy and stability in the region, which is housing. Obviously, we all have done a lot of work in the area of transportation, understanding the importance of the role that plays, and we've all worked so hard to address issues of zoning and affordability, et cetera. But in my opinion, what I thought was very interesting was just an opportunity to really confer and have these in-depth conversations and do this analysis with leaders from around the region, all working towards holding hands basically to adopt updated regional targets. In my opinion, if we don't have an entity like COG kind of pushing us forward and saying, you know, this is where you should be by this date, then it's tougher as we here locally wrestle with how to address this issue of housing writ large. So I really appreciated the opportunity to serve on this in this work group, and we met 3 times. We had a really in-depth conversation during our retreat in the summer, which was really amazing. And I do see here that Mayor Stewart from Tacoma Park is here. I know also the city of Rockville is always very well represented during these conversations at COG, and really truly doing the hard work of recognizing that each jurisdiction has a very different profile, a different story, and how we managed after that retreat, maybe it's because we were all kind of held up in this room with a lot of coffee, to come together and agree to these targets was really an amazing accomplishment. So that was really exciting. On September 11th, then the Board of Directors of COG, we voted to formally adopt the updated targets. And so basically, in the nutshell, the reality is that the number that has been adopted is 320,000 by 2030. And then for Montgomery County specifically, that brings the number to about 41,000, and that's a 10,000 increase from where we were before. Our municipalities like Tacoma Park and Rockville also play a role, and they also have a share of that additional 10,000. Also, COG felt very strongly that 75% of all new housing should be in activity centers or near high-capacity transit, and also felt very strongly that 75% of new housing should be affordable to low and middle income households. Here in Montgomery County, of course, and you know, this council has been very, very busy, and our FED committee, which is led by Councilmember Reamer and has Councilmember Friedson and Jawando as members, have already done a lot of work on top of what the previous councils have done to position ourselves and to push forward with a strategy to see how we can constantly open up opportunities to get us there. But again, I feel very strongly that in order for us to also be a major player regionally, you know, it would be really important that we affirm our commitment to these targets and then work as hard as we can to identify what are some of those perhaps barriers that are still standing in the way that can get us close and closer to this particular goal. So today what I wanted to do was, and I so much appreciate everybody's time, was to invite a panel that could really set the context and kind of talk to us about not only the report, but then also what would this mean for us here in Montgomery County, and then open it up to conversation, among my colleagues, questions, et cetera. I've also gone ahead to draft a resolution that I will then share with my colleagues if we are all in agreement, which I hope we are, and then affirming our commitment to adopt these targets. And we are going to work, of course, with the City of Rockville and the City of Tacoma Park to see whether we can do this in unison, and then be able, again, to send a signal to the region that Montgomery County is serious about this particular issue and wants to be a full engaged partner and player in adopting and achieving this goal. And so just very briefly, what I'm going to do is kind of say a little bit about each panelist, and then we'll engage in a conversation. And then I would like for everyone, after everyone has presented, then to engage in the conversation, if that's okay with my colleagues, so that way we can hear the full presentation and then get into the conversation. I first want to acknowledge that our county was very well represented in this process by the expertise of our planning director, Wynn Wright, who served in the Planning Directors Advisory Committee as co-chair, along with Andrew Trueblood, director of the DC Office of Planning, and they worked in tandem with the co-chairs of the Housing Directors Advisory Committee, Helen McLean, director of the Office of Housing for the City of Alexandria, and Polly Donaldson, director of the Washington, D.C. Department of Housing and Community Development. So I felt really great that she was playing such a pivotal role, because obviously she understands very clearly what we're trying to do here in the county and what we have done already. We also are very honored to have Leah Hentley and Maya Brennan from the Urban Institute, who also worked on the report that helped inform some of COG's work. Maya led the Targets for the Future section of the Urban Institute report, and Leah led the Targets for the Future Housing Needs by Income section of the report. And of course, this is a very useful report produced by a very well-respected think tank in our region, and so I thought it would be really important to have you here as well to give us a bit more in-depth, presentation and understanding of where we're going. Bob Buchanan is well known by all of us. He's a very well-respected developer in our community, also the co-founder of the 2030 Group. And this is an association of Washington metropolitan area business leaders focused on regional long-term decision-making. And as I mentioned earlier, the housing targets were adopted on September 11th at the COG Board of Directors, and Bob was there to also present to the Board of Directors, providing the private sector's perspective on this issue and also speaking to the importance of the issue as an economic imperative. And I think this is really critical, because it is obvious that it's going to take primarily a lot of focus and commitment from the elected officials, but also the private sector, to work in tandem to see how we can reach this goal. So I thought it would be great to have Bob here as well. And we will be joined, I think he said he was at another event in Silver Spring, but it's coming. We will be joined by Asim Nigam, who is our new Director of Housing and Community Affairs, who, among other things, is mission-driven to increase the supply of affordable housing in the county, which is a key component of the... And there he is, as I'm introducing him. Drum roll. Mr. Nigam makes an entrance. And so another interesting tidbit is that Mr. Nigam comes from Fairfax County, so he knows some of the challenges and opportunities faced in other parts of the greater Washington region, when we are specifically talking about affordable housing and also in housing affordability. And so, again, I will say that we here have been really focused on what's happening in Montgomery County and what we can do, but I feel very strongly that having these regional targets gives us this sort of additional way to hold ourselves accountable, as well as a roadmap to where we want to go. All right, so let's start with Ms. Wright.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. I do want to recognize Lisa Gavoni, who is our housing planner, who has helped our department with a lot of our data and analysis. But let's talk about the COG project, and it has had a long history. I want to just sort of quickly go through that. This actually originated in early 2018 with the TPB, the National Capital Region Transportation Planning Board. They were concerned about maintaining the appropriate balance of housing near jobs for transportation reasons. And they saw that there was a real need to bring the issue of housing and jobs closer together. In July of 2018, COG did some of their own analyses and found that there were probably going to be some regional housing shortfalls. And the COG board discussed that at their leadership retreat in 2018 and said we need to undertake a very deep dive, a detailed analysis of this. And they essentially tasked the planning director and housing director groups to study this topic and to work on it over the course of a year. So I was very excited to participate in that effort. There was a lot of conversation, and I do want to recognize that Paul Desjardins from the COG staff is here, and he was also very, very helpful in trying to pull us all together, keep us on task, working on this very important topic. The information that we got from the Urban Institute study really helped inform a lot of the thinking. And by July of 2019, during the COG board retreat, as Council Chair Navarro has mentioned, there was a set of recommendations that were presented to the COG board that were debated, discussed. Folks really had a lot of excellent questions and a lot of good conversation. And then ultimately in September, the COG board did adopt a series of recommendations based on all of those conversations about addressing the area's housing production and affordability challenges. So the overview of the recommendations are that we need about 75,000 units beyond the units already forecasted for the period of 2020 to 2030. And that amount is based in part on a lot of the work done by Urban Institute. You'll be hearing more about that. We also believe that it's very important that housing should be located in activity centers and near high capacity transit. And so I want to emphasize the and. Our activity centers are relatively small areas throughout Montgomery County, but with our BRT efforts on Route 29 and in other areas, we are looking at a lot of additional high capacity transit. And that 75% of new units produced should be in those activity centers and near high capacity transit. And we all agreed that the focus really should be on middle and lower AMI housing, and the affordability target should be that 75% of the units should be at these middle and low cost bands. What we do every few years is update our forecast. And again, some of you may not know a lot about what the county forecast is. It is how we work to project population, households, and at-place employment. And we share that forecast with the Council of Governments, and it is used to help inform COG's transportation model, which again, we also use as our model, although we enhance it in some ways as we work in the county, to do detailed planning. The projections that we produce, and it's the staff in our Research and Special Projects Division, at the planning department who develop these forecasts and projections are done at a very detailed level, all the way down to transportation analysis zones. And we look in detail at vacancies, the development pipeline, properties that may redevelop, and master plan development that may be expected over the next 10 to 15 years. We work, the staff in research and special projects works with all of the planners in the department to know about what's going on in all of our geographies. We work with other county agencies. We try to come up with a forecast. Again, it's not just for housing, it's for population, household, and at-place employment. We try to come up with projections that are reasonable, that are consistent with our past experiences, that are consistent with what we see going on in our own jurisdiction and in the region. So those projections were sort of the starting point for this study. But what we have found is that what we've projected may not actually meet the need, the housing need that exists. What we've projected is sort of what we expect based upon, projects we know are in the pipeline, past history of housing development, what we see going on in the region. But that may not be enough to fulfill our housing needs. So I want to make the distinction between our projections and then these targets. Projections are what we sort of our best estimate of what may happen. These targets talk more to what we need, and that's sort of the difference. And so we have come up with, again, through COG, the understanding that we need between 2020 and 2030 in the whole region about 75,000 additional households. And I want to talk about how that then fits for Montgomery County. We projected, again, using the method I just described, that our growth from 2020 to 2030 would be 31,000 households. And that included not just the unincorporated parts of Montgomery County, that is including the city of Rockville, the city of Gaithersburg, all of the other municipalities and jurisdictions. That is about 13% of the total regional households. So our jurisdictional share is about 13%. We have, in unincorporated Montgomery County, anticipated growth during that same time period, 2020 to 2030, of about 23,000 units. The city of Rockville has anticipated growth of 5,000 households, and the city of Gaithersburg has anticipated growth of 3,000 households. That altogether equals 31,000. In terms of the targets, again, not just the projections, but what do we need, there is 75,000, as we've talked about, for the whole region. And if we take 13% of that, which is our jurisdictional share, it comes to 10,000 households. Again, that would be not only in the unincorporated parts of Montgomery County, but also in the city of Rockville and the city of Gaithersburg. So that would be approximately 8,000 units in the unincorporated parts of the county, 1,000 units in Rockville, 1,000 units in Gaithersburg. And in fact, if we could go to the next slide, this chart may help, again, explain those numbers a little bit more. So again, for our existing projected growth, 31,000, if we contribute 13%, our jurisdictional share of this need that has been identified, it would be 10,000. That's a total of 41,000. Of that, only about 32,000 is within the unincorporated portions of Montgomery County. The remainder would be in the city of Rockville and the city of Gaithersburg. Now to talk about, so we've talked about sort of the numbers, let's talk about sort of the challenges. We have, over the last decade or so, averaged about 2,500 residential building permits per year. So what you see in orange, it's sort of the ups and the downs. You can see in 2008, 2009, when we were in the recession, the numbers dipped very low. We've recovered. We've leveled out, but at a lower number. The average, though, is 2,500. We use that average to help us, frankly, project and create those projections that go into the COG model. We, again, are looking at existing practice and our existing types of housing production when we're creating the model. But and that's what you sort of see in the blue, but what you see in the green is the additional housing we would need to produce to actually meet the need that we've talked about. Next. In terms of where the housing is happening, this is 2006 to the current. We have done an excellent job of really putting a lot of our new housing into our activity centers. And, you know, I think that we should be very pleased that we are remaining quite true to our smart growth policies, to the idea of developing along our transportation corridors. And we absolutely believe that we can continue that process, particularly when we take into account not just the activity centers, but the high capacity transit corridors. As you can see, I think there's a lot of capacity in areas, for example, like White Oak, where we can add additional housing to meet our housing demand while still staying near our activity centers and near our high capacity transit. So we're very committed to the idea that 75% of our new housing can and should be in those areas. We are definitely moving in that direction. We aren't at the point today of 75% of all new housing being in our activity centers, but we think it's absolutely doable. In terms of next steps, our work on the general plan, Thrive Montgomery 2050, is going to continue looking at our residential capacity, and we are in the process of doing that. We talked briefly with the Fed committee about this yesterday. We are going to continue to look at our impediments. Why are we not getting the housing production that we would like? I will say, and you'll probably hear about this in the report from the Urban Institute, we are not unusual. I think throughout the region, housing production has not really bounced back since the Great Recession, and so we are one of many jurisdictions having this same slightly lower housing production level. But we need to look at it and find out what are the land use and regulatory challenges, what are the market forces that are affecting the ability to create more housing, and what are the community dynamics. So we're very committed to doing that, both through our work on the general plan, but also in our work on all of our ongoing master plans that we work with you, the council, on. And I will turn it over to our next speaker.
All right, before we do that, I do want to recognize Louise Coughlin from the city of Gaithersburg, and another shout out to Paul Desjardins for all the work that he has done to help us through all of this. I've invited Mayor Stewart to sit at the table so that she can also share some thoughts in terms of some of the discussions we had at the retreat and some of her observations. And also wanted to recognize that my colleague Tom Hucker serves on the board of directors as well of COG. So I think there's just a lot of ownership here today. All right, so we'll go ahead and turn to our next panelist.
Thank you. Good morning, Council President Navarro and the Council. Thank you for the invitation to share our recent report. My name is Leah Hendy, and I'm a senior researcher at the Urban Institute. The views expressed today are my own and should not be attributed to any organization I'm affiliated with, their trustees, or their funders. Our goal with the Regional Housing Framework Report was to provide a foundation of facts and analysis that the region's leaders could use to develop a shared vision and actionable strategies to solve the region's housing challenges and build a well-functioning housing market that works for everyone. My co-authors and I are pleased that COG has taken a lead role in identifying regional targets and raising the visibility of this region's housing challenges. I prepared a handout with a few charts that I believe you all have a copy of. And I'll talk through that and then pass it over to my colleague, Maya Brennan, who will discuss our policy framework. We know that too many households in our region struggle to make ends meet, due in part to high housing costs. Across the region, 84% of households with the lowest incomes are housing cost burdened, paying more than 30% of their income towards housing. But even households in the middle of the income distribution face this challenge. Nearly 1 in 5 are cost burdened. Despite some slowdowns in population growth, rents and housing prices are rising rapidly since 2010, and the region has added housing units at only 56% of the rate it did in the 2000s, contributing to higher housing costs and worsening transportation challenges. As Figure 1 on the handout shows, we have too few low-cost units to meet the needs of households today, a problem that is shared by every jurisdiction. Overall, the region needs 264,000 lowest and low-cost units to ensure that every household has an affordable place to live. The region is growing, and with expected 363,000 households that will be added between 2015 and 2030, it's critical to think now about how we can about the housing we need to accommodate that growth so that we don't exacerbate today's challenges and can make progress aligning the housing supply with the residents' needs. To facilitate discussions on how to do this, we estimated the likely distribution of housing units by housing costs that would line up with the expected baseline household growth between 2015 and 2030 and the income distribution of those households in the future. In general, we do expect households with lower incomes will grow at a faster rate than households with higher incomes due to the impending retirement of the baby boom generation and trend in migration of people of color to the region, both from domestic in-movers and immigrants. Figure 2 presents a starting point for jurisdictions to think about what it would look like to have a distribution of housing units by cost that would work for all households. Meeting COG's affordability target means that every jurisdiction has a lot of work to do, and the majority of new units should be added in the low and middle cost categories. This picture of what we need for the future is on top of our current challenges. If we fail to reserve units that are affordable now, whether they're subsidized already or not, the need for low-cost units in the future will grow. We've estimated that 12,000 units in Montgomery County are currently federally assisted and have subsidies that will expire by 2030, as shown in Figure 3. Altogether, we estimate more than 34,000 units in the county are likely to require some intervention to preserve their affordability by 2030 as these units age and require major renovations or owners opt out of subsidy programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Maya.
Good morning, council members, and thank you all for having me here. My name is Maya Brennan, and I'm a senior policy associate at the Urban Institute. I worked with Leah on this report. So thank you for inviting both of us to share the report with you. As Leah noted, my views are also my own and should not be attributed to any of the organizations I'm affiliated with, their trustees or funders. So you've heard the estimates of the region's current and future housing needs, including the sizable shortfall of housing affordable for residents in the 2 lowest income bands. Our report provides a policy framework to support informed debate and decision-making as regional leaders and elected representatives strive to close this gap. The decision about how much of that gap to close and how to close it is up to you. Housing matters for local economies, business attraction and retention, and employee productivity. And a stable and affordable place to call home provides a strong foundation for success in life, whether for young children, youth entering college or the workforce, adults with disabilities, or those struggling to cope with caregiving duties, or seniors striving to retain their health and social networks in retirement. Because of the power of housing for communities and for their residents, the report's policy framework aims to support decision makers in ensuring that the housing market works for everyone. The region and the county are already home to people with an array of income levels. Our housing market needs to work from the lowest income to the highest and at every level in between. The data show that we have a long way to go to get there, and the policy framework also shows an array of tools that can get us there. I would neither expect nor ask the public sector to simply subsidize its way out of the current housing challenge. Closing the housing gap often calls for public leadership more than funds. Elected officials like yourselves have a role to play in reviewing or amending the regulations that influence development costs, in applying some guardrails to channel housing activity in the right direction, and in communicating a vision to local stakeholders about the place you want to be and the tools and partnerships that can help get you there. With the combination of regulations and deregulation and convening power, the public sector can use its existing housing resources to do more and ensure that any new funds allocated to closing the gap are wisely spent. The policy framework in our report applies a multi-part lens about what it takes to foster a healthy housing market. The 3 Ps that we use, which are increasingly recognized in high-cost areas like our own, stand for preserve, produce, and protect. We need to preserve existing housing affordability, produce more housing across the income spectrum, and protect households from discrimination and displacement. Under each of the 3 Ps, the policy framework offers a set of strategies and policy tools to inform policy discussion and debate. I would like to walk you through the strategies on the handouts that have also been provided to show how to put this 3P approach into practice. So while preservation often refers to preserving historic architecture, the form of preservation covered in the report is about preserving every bit of the affordability that our region already has. Because as Leah noted, if we fail to do so, we will spend time and money adding low-cost units to replace what was lost, yet getting nowhere in terms of closing the gap. Policies for preserving affordability can focus on getting low or moderate cost rental housing into mission-driven ownership, maintaining or repairing low and moderate cost housing, or incentivizing property owners to keep the rents affordable. Each of these strategies can help the county and the region hold on to affordability even if or when markets heat up. Yet the policy tools that work for one strategy may leave other opportunities on the table. For example, a policy that focuses just on preserving affordability by keeping lower cost housing in good repair may miss opportunities to maintain moderate rents at a well-maintained apartment building after the Purple Line opens nearby. You can review the preservation strategies and policy tools under each of these 3 areas in the handouts. There are similarly different strategies for advancing an overall housing production goal. So you may focus on production by helping find suitable spaces for more housing and encourage their use, by delivering new housing more quickly, or by offering greater affordability and inclusive opportunities through new developments. Many of the policies that can help produce more housing across the income spectrum call for streamlining regulations that otherwise limit development, either in general or in specific areas. Producing more housing in walkable or transit-rich locations would enable the county to retain its agricultural lands and green spaces while still accommodating the new households who will form or move into the area. You can review the policy tools for each of these strategies on the policy menu that notes production on it. For protection, the strategies relate to reducing displacement pressures ensuring fair and equitable access to housing, and preventing hazardous living conditions. You can see on the policy protection menu that this set of strategies opens the door to policy discussions about the value of home purchase assistance, longer-term lease options, emergency rental assistance, and a variety of other policy options that can reduce instability and displacement pressure, just to highlight a few of the tools. There is, however, no golden ticket and no magic solution. We've offered a menu of multiple tools for each strategy and goal because we do need multiple tools, and we have estimates of the kind of impacts that each can offer in the complete report. The county is already using many of these policy tools, sometimes setting a high bar and other times still testing the waters. Getting to the set of policies that can fill the gap now and in the future is an iterative process. Just checking the box that you have a policy does not indicate whether it is doing its job well. Some policies work best as part of a package, with other policies strengthening their results. For example, policies that use public land for housing development could have a greater impact if those parcels are also zoned for multifamily development. Likewise, most policies can have stronger or weaker variations, and it's important to review the policies you have to ensure that they are getting the results that you want. The selected recommendations handout shows the 12 tools that our analysis suggests offer high potential in the Washington region overall. As we reviewed the policy options and identified these 12, our goal was to spark serious debate and discussion, not to call for every jurisdiction to take each 12 of these specific actions. We also recognize that jurisdictions in the area are not all at the same starting place in terms of the current policy landscape, and do not have all the same needs or capacities. Parking requirements provide a prime example of this. Some communities have already reduced the minimum parking ratios for residential development and would likely get the same amount of parking even if the ratios were lower, because car access is that essential. But for communities with reasonable transit access or developments where many people live car-free, a lower parking requirement could make a substantial difference in the amount of housing available at that site or the cost of delivering it. The decision about what to do is yours. What do you want your county to look like? How do you want to support your current residents' housing needs? Will the youth growing up here today be able to make their home here in the future? And will your doors continue to be open to new households drawn to the Washington region, as my grandfather was, by the promise of reliable work? Indecision and the long search for a perfect solution could let private landowners and investors decide the county's future without you. Local residents and newcomers are relying on you to lead the way. The policy descriptions here give you some starting ground to consider as you ensure that the housing options in the county do work for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Mr. Buchanan.
Good morning, Madam President. And for the record, my name is Bob Buchanan of Buchanan Partners, a local based, headquartered here in Montgomery County. I'm also, as you indicated before, Madam President, head of the group called the 2030 Group, which are regional business leaders throughout the region and have been very much involved in a regional perspective that I think all of us now appreciate is one of the reasons we're attacking housing affordability in the meaningful way we are, and I commend COG for taking the lead on that. I'm also former chair of your Economic Development Commission Corporation, and as President Navarro mentioned earlier, I see housing affordability proaction as an economic imperative. It shows leadership. It shows what we recognize as one of our strongest assets is our workforce. We want to attract it, we want to keep it, and we want that workforce to appreciate all that quality of life we pride ourselves in. I'm joined today by David Bowers, who's community leader in Enterprise Community Development and also head of the Housing Leaders Group of Greater Washington. He too has been very much involved in bringing public awareness to housing affordability crisis, and 2030 Group has been a very active member with him. I want to thank him for some of the comments I will make, as well as local leaders in development community, Tom Bizzuto, David Flanagan of Elm Street, and Russ Gestel of Buchanan Partners. But let me first start with commending the elected leaders of the region for taking this on. It's not going to be easy, and my comments are more directed to the specifics of making sure we just don't say we're going to do something without knowing how we're going to do it. So being the lone member of the private sector here today, it's a little lonely, but I hope you'll hear me out. I want to make some general comments about the various issues that affect housing and why any meaningful resolution of these matters must include collaboration between public and private sectors. I have also made some specific recommendations on how to get more housing in Montgomery County, and I would urge you today, approve whatever resolution is in front of you as a start. We need far more housing than we're thinking or talking about, but we know it has to be incrementally achieved. And I also want to mention that this impacts not only the and underemployed, but also is a major concern for our highly touted and skilled workforce. And our employers are very concerned about workforce housing as well. Our housing crisis sits atop a three-legged stool. The three legs, supply, cost, and affordability, while all interrelated, need to be studied and addressed individually, as each has very different problems, participants, and potential solutions to determine and address. Housing supply is primarily constrained by the cost and availability of land. That land is impacted greatly by highly technical and expensive federal, state, and local land use regulations, which constantly increase time and financial costs of the entitlement and approval process, and unfortunately, growing NIMBY opposition to new residential development and density. Throw in the increasing environmental impacts to the development process, infrastructure to support new growth, and no, we haven't even begun to mention the shortage of labor and growing costs for materials. Yes, the list is daunting, but we have no choice but to confront it. Those jurisdictions and regions that do will be able to attract and retain and compete with anybody in this country and the world. And we're at the center of it. And I'll just digress for a minute and just say the HQ2 process transformed the way we do economic development. It's not just about houses and transportation, it's about workforce development and the connectivity of all three. Today we're focused on housing affordability, so I will stay with that. But the activity centers do need to have the infrastructure to get the transportation to them, as was mentioned. So if the council passes this resolution for more housing, who will be tasked with an action plan on how to reach the specific goal? The action plan should include steps to increase county funding, enhance land use leverage, reduce costs, and expedite the process where appropriate from the government side. Remember, as of now, government adds 30 to 35% to the cost of housing. An action plan should also include private sector input and goals as well, with targets for private sector investment and participation to reduce costs. This work could find synergy with the Housing Leaders Group of Greater Washington Capital Housing. That challenge is currently working to secure $1 billion in new public and private investments in housing affordability in the region by the end of 2020, a commitment for $1 billion. Some thoughts on how to increase the housing supply for our county. There is nowhere near enough housing units planned for future construction in a place known for its schools, quality of life, and outstanding workforce. To date, Montgomery has not done enough to add significant units around future Purple Line stations. Why not revise and increase the housing targets for every metro station in the county? Fairfax is looking at some 100,000 new units on the Silver Line alone. The Purple Line is a catalytic opportunity to preserve and produce more housing near future transit. Will we take advantage of this opportunity? The county is to be commended for approving, and this council for approving ADUs. But are there next steps to incentivize implementation of these sooner than later? Can the county establish a maximum time limit to keep school cluster in moratorium? Other Maryland counties already have that policy. The county regulation for allowing developments to waive all impact fees for increasing the percentage of MPDUs from 12.5% to 25% is working. Keep it. We don't need to end this policy if it is being considered. Does it make sense to form an ad hoc task force to ensure that we are not just approving more residential units without knowing how to make them more affordable for rent as well as purchase? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Buchanan. Mr. Nikki?
Good morning. Asim Nigam, Director of DHCA. Well, the numbers are staring at us in the report. There's a shortage of housing supply. It's not just in affordable housing. And earlier this morning, I was speaking before Primary Care Coalition folks in Silver Spring, unfortunately next to the area where the unfortunate event happened yesterday. But the talk over there was how housing is related to healthcare and to mental well-being of a family. And there's a direct correlation between price-appropriate housing and mental health of a family, children's health, and putting the family on the path of economic success. If you look at the report, it basically validates what we already know. There's a shortage of housing, and more so in affordable housing. We know that for a fact that we have at least 20,000 households, renter households in the county who are rent burdened, who may be paying more than 50, 60% of their gross income towards the rent, which means that they don't have that much disposable income to spend on food, education, transportation, and what have you. Then there's also a direct correlation between the economic success of the county and affordable housing. If we are looking to attract businesses to the county, they look at where their employees are going to live. They don't want the employees to live 40 miles away and leave the job after 6 months or have a lower productivity because they cannot get to work on time. Which also leads to, if you are able to attract business to the county, that leads to more jobs and hopefully well-paying jobs for our county residents. So affordable housing cuts across several spectrum, and in order for Montgomery County to achieve full economic development potential, we have to serve people among all income spectrum. That being said, our focus on government resources should be towards those families who are earning at or below 50% of AMI, because that's hard to serve population, our special needs population, including the elderly, because everyone can serve or would like to serve someone at 70, 80, 90% of AMI. The COG report mentions about zoning. The zoning is there in the county. As I said, no good deed goes unpunished. We have developers who are sitting on the sideline. They are not building because we have upzoned several areas in the county. And if I'm the developer, if I was able to build only 500 units, now because of upzoning I can build 1,000 units, I may want to wait for the market to turn around and before I can start building to increase my profit margin. So there's a challenge over there. Then COG report it always refers to Urban Institute numbers. It doesn't talk about need per AMI levels. If you look at Urban Institute numbers, and if we can talk about the numbers all day long, if you take the numbers on the face value, it also mentions that there will be a need for another 20,000 households to be served at or below 50% of AMI between 2020 and 2030. So between the 20,000 renter households who are rent burdened now and another 20,000 between 2020 and 2030, we're looking at 40,000 renter households to be served in order to stay with the curve or getting ahead of the curve here. So where do we go from here? We, as political leaders or bureaucrats, community need to engage in this dialogue and need to recognize affordable housing is in our face, and it is important and needs to be dealt with. That being said, our resources on the government side are limited. We can leverage, and we'll look at those opportunities where we can leverage our resources to the maximum. But that being said, we as the private sector, the nonprofit service providers need to come together and look at, and also the state and the federal resources. We need to bring those resources to the bear and see if there's a way we can increase those resources for Montgomery County residents. We need to look at how we are negotiating our construction contracts. If there's a way to bring the cost down, if there is a way to look at our processes, whether it's county process or federal process or state process, to bring efficiencies and look at those requirements which are adding to the cost. I met with a group of folks a few days ago, and they said the county process in certain areas needs some attention, so which we should be looking at, which we are looking at. But it's going to be a sum total of different things which are going to come together if we're going to stay ahead of the curve. With that, I'm going to rest my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nigam. Mayor Stewart.
Thank you so much for having me today. I just want to thank first Council President Navarro for your leadership on this. It has really been a great honor to serve on the COG board right now as we've been discussing this. And as you mentioned before, particularly our summer retreat, seeing jurisdictions from around this region come together, debate, and finally decide to join each other and support these goals was really remarkable. And so I'm really honored to be here. I want to tell you a little bit about what's happening in Tacoma Park, because we truly do want to partner with the county and the rest of the jurisdictions in the region to attack this issue. Tacoma Park has been working on affordable housing and looking at economic development for the last 4 years. We've been working on a strategic plan, and Wednesday night we are going to vote to adopt it. And I am fairly optimistic that my colleagues will join me in supporting it. In this plan, we acknowledge and state that housing is a human right, that our role as a municipality, as a government, is to ensure that residents in our community have safe, quality housing, and that this is related to our goals on climate change as well as on racial equity. We've talked about the imperative this morning around housing, and we really do see this as a moral imperative, and we're so glad the county is taking this up as well. We do have challenges in Tacoma Park. You know, we're a small, densely developed community. Much of our development is from the 1970s, but we also have huge opportunities. While we mourn the loss of Washington Adventist Hospital from our community, we also see their campus and partnering with Washington Adventist University as an opportunity to look at the housing needs in this region. In addition, we do have the Purple Line coming in, and we are looking at what we can do with the New Hampshire Avenue Rec Center and building partnerships to put in housing and a new rec center there. In addition, in our plan, we love the Urban Institute's 3 Ps so much that we adopted them in our plan. Of course, we're Tacoma Park, so we had to make them our own as well, but they're pretty much mirror those recommendations. And in addition, in our plan, we do talk about adopting housing targets and working with the county to do that in Tacoma Park. So as I said, this plan is really ambitious for us. We are stating that we know we need to increase density in our already dense community, and that we want to move forward working with the county. I hope you all will support Council President Navarro's resolution on this, because we do believe that setting goals are really important for us. By setting goals, we have something to strive for, and we also have something that people can hold us accountable for, and we can hold each other accountable. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much, Mayor Stewart, and really thank you all. I think that we are able to see a very comprehensive picture of the opportunities and the challenges that we face. To answer a question that you posed, Mr. Bob, who's gonna lead and who's gonna take this on? I can tell you that I am so proud to serve on this council with my colleagues. We spent quite a bit of time during our last retreat on Friday discussing the adoption of an economic development platform, which I had shared with you in draft form, but really to affirm our commitment to lead on issues like transportation, housing, workforce development, as well as business attraction, retention, and expansion on a very high level. And some people might say, well, why aren't you just specifying, targets and outcomes? The reality is that we do need to take a step back and affirm our commitment at a very high level so that we can begin to work and execute those specific targets. And so it is so interconnected. And it's going to take more than just government to get this going. It really is going to take this partnership. But no doubt that I think for me, during this retreat, recognizing that there were so many jurisdictions that were really struggling with adopting these targets and have a lot more work to do than us. And so that is the real good news here. And again, I'm really proud to serve on this council in this moment in time, because I believe that everyone here has, decided to be very public about how we're going to hold ourselves accountable and how we are going to do whatever we can to position ourselves. We have no choice. We have no choice here in Montgomery County. We cannot continue to pretend that we can be complacent when it comes to our commitment to housing and workforce development and transportation, because the economic development buzz that we need, that is so important for us to be able to pursue. And so it requires this kind of commitment and this kind of leadership. So I turn over to my colleague Hans Riemer, and when you said who's going to be responsible for executing all of this, and I said, well, you are. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to him, and also do want to appreciate Pam Dunn, who's been really staffing us in a lot of these issues. So maybe I'll say, both you and Pam and all of us are going to have to be held accountable and responsible for this. Councilmember Riemer.
Thank you, Council President Nancy Navarro. Really appreciate your bringing this before the council today and your work over the past several years at COG in helping to formulate this plan, providing support on behalf of Montgomery County through the COG process to set an ambitious goal. It is a clarion call for action. It is a challenge for the county to rise and show leadership and to establish clearly that we have a housing shortage and that we have to be very aggressive about supporting new housing. If we will all internalize that and make that part of our daily thinking and daily decision making, then we might indeed be able to get to a place where we're able to produce the kind of numbers that it's going to take to meet the goal. But to the point of this exercise, as the council president said, we do need to step back and reaffirm our commitment to the goal and our understanding of the nature of the problem that we have. But I think this comes at a really good time. I feel like the politics of housing are shifting a bit, and there is a window for us to go through. We spent much of this year in a debate about accessory dwelling units. The council passed unanimously a very strong accessory dwelling unit policy that years ago would not have been possible here at the county, at the council. We have a whole new YIMBY movement in Montgomery County. We have young people, actually not even all just young people, we have people involved in progressive politics for whom creating new housing is the cause because of how it has such a multi-layered impact on affordability, quality of life, social justice, how all these pieces fit together. I feel like the politics of housing are changing a lot. No better example of that than Mayor Kate Stewart in Tacoma Park, who has led that community through a very challenging conversation about infill development right in Tacoma Park, and has generated, tremendous criticism for what is a very, reasonable proposal to bring some needed redevelopment into Tacoma Park. But there is a culture of resistance to development that is unfortunately hard for some people to let go. And they view developers as the man, and they view development as destructive. And there's a whole new group of people saying, no, this is a process to improve our community when it is done in accordance with a community vision, which is what our planning process is about, which is what our zoning is designed to achieve. And so we have, this is the time to, again, stand very tall on our housing goals. It is, I can't not address the elephant in the room. There are also a lot of comments made in the media by the county executive that don't share this vision. That is why it's important for the county council to be clear where we stand, because regional leaders are looking at this county and trying to understand, where's Montgomery County on housing issues? Where does this county stand as this region grapples with the challenge? So again, that's why I go back to why it is so important that the council president brought this before us, and why we'll need to follow up on it, because the region is wondering, what is Montgomery County's view on housing? I'm here to join my colleagues in saying there's no question that we need to achieve these goals. There is no debate about these goals. And we've heard a little bit of criticism of these, and I know that the county executive has been critical of this plan. He's been critical of these goals. He has said that this is not necessarily justified. I don't share that view. There are interesting questions about affordability that are raised in this plan. We've heard a lot of comments about, we don't really need to worry about housing unless it is for the 50% AMI resident or lower. I think this plan refutes that very plainly. The COG plan says we need housing at all income levels, but B, it's the low and the middle where we have a very serious problem going forward. So we must figure out how to produce housing at all income levels. Yes, to Director Nagam's point, our public resources should be focused on the most affordable levels, the most deeply affordable levels, but we also have to recognize that often that's going to come in developments where there are higher cost units. And that's often where we run into trouble, is if there is any unit in that building that is not, higher cost, then we have NIMBY reactions. So to drill into a few examples, the Littonsville sector plan that this previous council adopted is a visionary plan that combines public-private partnership, affordable housing developers, the private sector, produces thousands of new units of housing, a large share of them affordable. We need to get that plan going. We need to get results on that plan. It's on the purple line, to Mr. Buchanan's point. It is right. It is exactly where housing should be. We really need the county executive to lead a process to bring that vision to reality. The Veers Mill plan that this council adopted, we had a vision for the Veers Mill plan. The one particular property that was of great focus of discussion, several thousand units planned in that development, with an unprecedented level of them set aside in our affordable housing plan. We need the county executive to follow through on the public land that is intended to make that deal possible. The Purple Line Corridor, Bob, you mentioned that as being a place where we really need to be aggressive. I agree. There is a whole housing plan that I think has achievable goals in it. We need to hit the goals and go beyond. We need to bring new housing to the Purple Line Corridor, and by bringing the new housing, hit our affordability target. But if we only look at the Purple Line as a threat If we only look at the purple line as a place where there will be, where people will be losing, and we should prevent investment, we should stop change, then we're never going to be able to hit these kind of numbers, and we're never going to be able to put in place the long-term affordability protections that ultimately are really needed and that you can't avoid by pretending that no change will actually preserve affordability. So we've got a lot to take up. The Fed committee will address barriers to housing. Obviously, there is a legal barrier in place of a lot of new housing in the county right now. It's called a housing moratorium. Talk about an elephant in the room. There's a lot of housing that would like to be created in the Walter Johnson cluster, in the Blair cluster, and it's not allowed. So we need to resolve that problem so that when there is the private sector ready to step up and create housing, we have a flexible system that can allow it to come to fruition. So these are just some of the issues that we'll be working through, but I just wanted to, again, add my voice of support, and I look forward to working on this as we proceed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairman Weimer. Councilmember Rice.
Thank you very much, Madam President. So it's interesting in listening to this conversation because these things aren't new. For the 47 years that I've been here, we've been talking about this, talking about where development should be, where it shouldn't be, how it needs to be near metro centers, those are the only areas that are super expensive, and so therefore people go outside of. It's the reason why we have development in Germantown. You have 100,000 residents in Germantown because we recognize that not everybody could afford to live down county. Back when it was farmland, no one was talking about going to Germantown. No one was talking about going to Clarksburg. But yet, those are two areas where combined represent the largest pocket and sector of people, generally larger than Rockville, Bethesda, Chevy Chase. Those are the areas where people are, and people are there because housing is affordable. The interesting thing is that we oftentimes always tie ourselves to transportation. And it's interesting because people in Montgomery County figure out a way to make it work. I've always said in a lot of our conversations about what it is that people who are challenged with not having the access to means do. When we have these conversations about how our poor only use Metro or only use Ride-On, couldn't be farther from the truth. All you have to do is just spend some time at local CarMax or go to any of the local auctions that are in Northern Virginia and see the Maryland residents who are there that are buying cars for $500 or $1,000. They know that it's not going to be reliable. They know that they're going to have issues with them, but they need it to get around because they've decided to invest in a place where they can afford to live, which is not in a lot of our epicenters of Montgomery County. And so I think that we need to be very careful about saying that we only want to focus on development in those areas or that that's the primary focus, because what happens is we lose sight of where many of the people are. As we just had a Germantown Oktoberfest and parade for the first time ever, and seeing the great turnout was there, people were talking about how Germantown is finally becoming a place. Well, Germantown doesn't have access to mass transit. Germantown has spotty ride-on service, but people are making Germantown home. And the reason why they're doing it is because it represents affordable housing. It represents that missing middle that some people would pretend doesn't exist. I will tell you that it's incredibly important for us to continue to remember that the young professionals that Councilmember Reamer was talking about are moving there. I was just talking with Will Roberts, who's the chair of our Up-County Citizens Advisory Board, a millennial. He just moved to Clarksburg, just bought in Clarksburg, and is so happy with what's going on there and seeing the development and continues to push for the things that we need to. I think what we need to do is not only focus on some of those epicenters that are there. That's certainly a focus for us. But we also can't forget about the areas where we know where there's still the availability of affordable housing right now for people who need it, where it's being built, where we as a council made a decision that we were going to continue to allow for that development to happen, like Clarksburg. Those are decisions that we consciously made knowing that folks would have to make a choice. Are you going to live in an area where you don't have access to mass transit, where you don't have the same amenities that you do in other places, but that also represent that affordable housing model? People did that. My wife and I did that. 100,000 people in Germantown did that. And so I think that it's important for us to encapsulate all of that, because the other piece is that we always talk about housing, but we don't talk about the other things that surround housing. It's more expensive to go out to eat in Bethesda than it is in Germantown. It's more expensive to go to the dry cleaners in Bethesda than it is in Germantown. It's more expensive if you're sending your child to pre-K in Bethesda than it is in Germantown. All those other ancillary expenses also add up. So the simple fact that you're giving a person a more subsidized rent doesn't always mean that that's going to be the only thing that makes them decide that they want to live there, nor makes it completely affordable. We can't forget about the day in and day out, the real decisions that people make every single day that encapsulate what it is that they do in deciding where they want to live. That's the reason why we have to focus on a multitude of options and not just focus on a narrow few. What we also have to do is make sure that we're delivering on the promise. We promised people in the Up-County that we would give them the ability to be able to get around, understanding that they would not be connected to mass transit. So we said the CCT. We said M83. We said all of these things that would be there to allow for them to be able to make things work. But we haven't been so good at delivering on those promises that we've made. So before we go and start jumping into all the other things that we want to do, I just want to remind us that we have some promises that have yet to been fulfilled. We have some promises that have yet to have been kept. And so from that perspective, we also have to remember those things also when we're talking about this, because as we're building housing and as folks are deciding where to live, they're still banking on the promises that we made to them. They're still banking on the fact that there will be things that will be done that will make their lives a little bit easier, and we're banking on the fact that they will decide what they decide based on a narrow set of circumstances when there are so many that are much wider. And so from that perspective, I think we're on the right page. I am one who firmly believes that more is better because it provides opportunity for choice. It also drives down cost. Everyone knows that. It's a no-brainer. The more inventory you have, the cheaper it becomes. And so we need to do that and provide those options for folks. But we need to do it in a mix. And so while I hear about the 75-25 and all those kinds of numbers, they sound great, but in reality, what I think we need to do is just say we need to focus on all. We need to focus on development in the counties that are the epicenters, or in the areas of the county where they're the epicenters, where we have metro stations and where we have a lot of infrastructure. But we also need to continue to remember that there are folks up there where I live who are still choosing to live there and making it work for them. And we need to ensure that those choices are still there for them, whether it's building in a place that some of my community, like Tacoma Park, may not like Damascus, who the second we say about development, say, no development here. But yet, it's interesting, because we've actually approved a number of different projects. And guess what? Amazingly, now that these projects are on the ground and there, everything seems to be just fine. People are making the choice and saying that I'm not going to have the infrastructure that I would have in Bethesda or whatever the case may be. Again, it's not to say that anything that we're saying here isn't right. It's just that there's more to the story. And so I'll close with that. Thank you.
That's a fair point. I do want to note that on Circle 35, I guess we didn't specifically define activity centers, but Clarksburg, Germantown, Gaithersburg Metropolitan Grove, Gaithersburg Kentlands, Gaithersburg Central, Life Science Center, Gaithersburg are included as part of the activity center. So it's defined broader than I think what we're usually used to. So you can rest assured that it's all there. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Council President, and to all my colleagues, and thank you all for being here. This is a conversation I think we could conduct all day. It's a big part of who we're going to be and what we need to be for all of our residents. There's a lot of competing interests that have been laid out by the panel, so I want to commend the Council President for her leadership on this and many other issues. Ms. Brennan, Is that okay? Good. So you're Maya Brennan. Okay, I got it right. I'm happy. You just created my new slogan that I'm going to put in my office, and congratulations. I'll repeat it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. We can't subsidize our way out of our housing crisis. Did you say that? Is that a fair characterization?
That is. I believe we can't simply subsidize our way out of the housing crisis. But yes.
Oh, so do I have to add the simply?
It's your choice.
Okay. Well, I know. I think it's a fair point, and one of many things that was said today, and that's going to go right below Kate's, Mayor Stewart's housing is a human right. That's good. So they're going to be together. They're going to have a fed wall of statements, because it really is a human right, and I agree with you. There's no silver bullet to this, and we're really dealing with. When I was born, we had half the population. You know, we had 600-some thousand people. It was a suburb. The farms were still around in many places, and we've had all this growth, and we're still this core issue. How do we handle it? Where do people go? And people were used to the suburban life, so they moved out. And I want suburban life somewhere else. And promises were made, to Councilmember Rice's point, that we're going to make it easier for you to get to where you need to go from those places, and they weren't kept. And those are decisions I wasn't here for, even born for in some cases. And we have this situation in Clarksburg and other places where we have people out there that are stranded and not connected to jobs, but they have beautiful homes and beautiful communities and love where they live. You know, there was a rumor out there that I'd moved to Clarksburg. I have not moved to Clarksburg, but I love, I'm a big fan of Clarksburg. I just want to say that on the record. Yeah, well, I appreciate it. But I live in East County, which is similarly situated in that when my wife and I were making decisions, we had our first child, and where are we going to live? Knowing that we're going to have a bigger family, where can we afford to live? And we moved to Colesville in East County and just past White Oak and said this is where we're going to live. And we like the community. We like having you there. Oh, I appreciate it, Tom. And Council President lives right down the road as well. We're neighbors. And so we all made these decisions. But that doesn't mean we don't want access to transit. It doesn't mean we don't want quality amenities. It doesn't mean we don't want jobs in our region, in our area. So I think there's a lot of competing priorities here. And I really liked, Ms. Brennan, your colleague, the 3 Ps. I think we should adopt a version of that as well: preserve, protect, produce, and protect. And obviously the details are very important around those things. How we define what is low cost and what's middle cost, how we define what the guardrails are, and how do we best leverage, to Director Nagam's point, public land and our power here in the county to upzone or not, and how do we get the best bang for our buck? How do we have the right combination of regulation and deregulation? I think oftentimes you hear people discuss one or the other, not both together. And it was refreshing to hear you say that there probably needs to be changes on both sides. And I would agree with that. And so the question, I know I've had, other than I do have a question for Director Nagam. You mentioned the focus should be, and I'm characterizing your quote again, 50% of AMI and below. And in part, to talk about that, you talked about the 20,000 folks that are housing burdened now and the more coming. Could you talk about some of the steps you think we need to take to focus on that type of housing? I agree with your premise, but could you just get a little more specific on that?
As you mentioned, and as was mentioned by the panelist, there's no silver bullet to all of this. And as I mentioned, if you go back to a couple of months ago during my confirmation hearing, there have to be many of options. In order to serve folks at or below 50% of AMI, we not only have to look at our policies and the money that we have under HIF, we have to look at, what other things that we can bring to the bear in terms of efficiencies in our processes, doing partnership and sitting down with our for-profit partners, non-profit partners, to see how we can bring the cost down in terms of the development cost, how we are negotiating transactions. We can look at county-owned land, which we have been looking at previously, and how we are leveraging our county-owned land. We can look at if there are opportunities in terms of refinancing, or there's some money that can be saved, and we can increase the HIF funding. Because as I mentioned, if we have to serve another 20,000 household, enter household between 2020 and 2030, at or below 50% of AMI, that's 2,000 households every single year. We don't have the resources available with us to produce another 2,000 units for at or below 50% of AMI. There could be, many, as Councilmember Navarro was mentioning, I came from across the river, and there are other options like tax increment financing that Northern Virginia, Fairfax County was looking at. So there are things that we have to look at in terms of menu of options. No one single option is going to work. And I'm not going to say that Fairfax County has solved this problem. No, they have not. They have a long way to go. But at the same time, when we look at economic development, we don't have to just look at housing in a vacuum. We have to see if we are able to attract businesses here, create more economic base for the county, increase the economic base for the county so that we can help those people who really need our help, create jobs and well-paying jobs. So there's something to be learned from Northern Virginia that we can, use in Montgomery County.
I appreciate it, and you underscored a point that I think is so important in this discussion, that if we're not extremely careful and deliberate about the tools that we have, whether they be county-owned land or our zoning authority or impact tax waivers that was mentioned by Mr. Buchanan, if we're not getting the most that we can out of those levers, we're not going to achieve the goals we need to achieve for our most vulnerable populations. We have communities where half or more of the people are at this 50% or less of AMI area, many near where I live. And if we're not really focused on that, we're not going to get there. We have no chance of getting there. So that's why when I think we do need to revisit the 25% impact tax to see if we're getting those units for what we're paying, if we're getting the most bang for our buck. I think that's something we need to look at. If we are, I'll be the first one jumping up and down for it. But we need to critically analyze things like that. And my last question, just with Gwen, comment. Director Wright, you mentioned White Oak as an area poised for growth. Obviously, you have a personal concern about that area, and I think you're right. Could you talk a little bit about, while there's a lot of housing, single-family housing, and other housing out there now, could you talk about the mix that's going to be needed on transportation? Because if you come down New Hampshire Avenue or Colesville Road in the morning, and you tell people we're going to build more housing here, you're going to, we already have that happening. What are we going to do about that? And so the mix of job growth out there with the projects and also the need for transportation infrastructure upgrades. I know we have BRT coming, but I just think we always have to say those things together because the concern is great, and it's a real concern.
Yeah, I think, honestly, the eastern part of the county is one area that I am most excited about. Job growth, yes, we need to attract new businesses, but I don't think we can dismiss the fact that FDA has already approved a new master plan to add approximately 7,000 to 8,000 more jobs to the FDA campus in the next 10 to 15 years. That is an enormous number of jobs. We have to make sure that the people who take those jobs have opportunities to live near FDA so they aren't living in Howard County and commuting to FDA. Those are well-paying, really excellent kinds of jobs that we have been told are coming. We have great opportunities. Some of you attended the Burtonsville placemaking. That is...
I helped build some of it.
I saw you with your paintbrush. That was great. But I am excited about Burtonsville. This is a place where, to talk about people who are saying yes to development, those are people who are saying, we have this giant empty parking lot and empty shopping center. We're ready for something fantastic to happen there. And I hope the placemaking helped to show that that is possible, that something fantastic can happen and that there is a market for that in that particular community. Some of it is working with the private sector to show them that there is a market, that it can happen. I have been very excited about some of the projects that are moving forward through our White Oak plan, like the Hillendale Gateway project, which is moving forward as a partnership between HOC and a private developer. I think partnerships are the future. I also think that we're excited about the White Oak Town Center project, which is a mixed-use development with retail and housing. But as the BRT comes online, I think we need to do more and focus more on how to provide, whether it be tax increment financing or other kinds of incentives to help people focus on those communities. I am also, again, I'm very excited about Germantown and Up County, but as you can see from the heat map that we provided, we've actually gotten a lot of housing in those areas. The areas where we have not had a lot of housing since 2006 are places like White Oak and Glenmont, and even Tacoma Park. And so, we need to do it all. We need to work on all fronts, and it is a combination of looking at opportunities to incentivize development in the places where we want development to happen, and those incentives can be things like zoning, but they can also be things like tax increment financing or ways to perhaps lessen impact fees for a period of time. There are all sorts of opportunities of ways to incentivize. I did want to also mention, I have the floor, we're working on ideas of how to really help preserve, one of the 3 Ps. And one of the things that you all approved that's in our work program for this year that we have just kicked off is a study of how, of preservation of affordable housing. And Lisa Gavoni is leading that, but she's involving folks from DHCA, from the private sector. It's really, again, very important. So we're trying to work at this time with you all on sort of all of the above.
Right.
Preservation, absolutely. Production in the appropriate places and with the infrastructure to support that production. And, I feel energized. I feel energized by the whole COG experience. And I think we are setting ourselves off in the correct direction.
Thank you very much, and look forward to working with you as we move forward. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Madam President. I also want to thank you for one of the roles that the Council President has is setting the agenda. And I think today's agenda has been uniquely scheduled. And I'm actually going to call it Affordable Housing Day, because we started the morning with a proclamation to Montgomery Housing Partnership for 30 years of service, building affordable housing for residents of Montgomery County. We're having this very thorough conversation about the reality here in Montgomery County and across the entire DC region. And then in a few moments, I'll be introducing a piece of legislation, the Housing Impact Fairness Act, which is my contribution to this conversation. And I understand that there are a lot of tools that we need for our collective toolbox, and that's the sentiment that everybody has shared. And the legislation I'll be putting forth is one more tool that we can use to help address this very complex and very challenging issue, where we have to build more than 300,000 units in the DC region, tens of thousands of units here in Montgomery County. And it's not a question. We have to do this. If we want to leave our community in a better place for future residents, where they can afford to live here, where they will thrive, where they can take public transportation, where they will have access to jobs, and they'll feel safe and secure. These are not questions. These are marching orders for all of us. And so I look forward over the term of this council to dig deep and figure out how we accomplish this enormous task that is upon us. because again, it is not a question, but we have to do this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam President. You know, this is an unbelievable task for the next 10 years. I mean, it sounds like you talk about 2030, it's a long time off. It's not. It's literally the blink of an eye, and especially when you're talking about infrastructure. And that's what we have to be talking about. This is a puzzle that needs to fit together. And I mean, all of us need to figure out not only how we're going to do it. I certainly support the idea and the resolution and all the things necessary. But we also have to figure out how we're going to pay for the things to bring for the people that are going to be here. In some cases, we haven't done the greatest job in the world for what we have already, and so we have to make certain that we're doing this. And others have talked about it, but we talk about the 75% of the 20,000 or 23,000 or whatever that's going to be in the activity centers and the high capacity transit areas. That's certainly understandable, but we're talking about 25% that's not, and that's 5,000 units, and we have to figure out how people are going to get there. And to Craig's point, yes, people are used to not having the same amenities in many cases, and there's a difference for what they're paying and all of that. But there's also an expense to get to work. And in some cases, and people can work up in your area, in my area, and other places, and they do, thank goodness, and people come in from other areas to do that. But we have to make certain that we are keeping all of this in mind. It's truly a puzzle that fits together, and we need the coordination. And with that, we have to understand that we need a blueprint. We need to say that we're going to do this, and this is how we're going to afford to do this, to keep the quality of life up for the people in Montgomery County, because in some cases we have not done that. We have to make certain, and I believe it would be helpful to me if we could figure out the unit breakdown. I mean, it's one thing to say we need 20,000 units, but how many of those units are one bedroom? How many are two bedroom? How many are single families? How many are townhomes? I think that becomes necessary as well, just not a unit count, but in general. I'd like to know for certain how our master plans, and of course our partners from the municipalities have their own master plans, but how our master plans work for the 75-25% split. Are we there? Do we need to figure out how we're going to, if we need to rezone things or consider rezoning things, what that means? And if things are going to be rezoned, how much of those are going to be something that's developed land or undeveloped land? The undeveloped land obviously is cheaper to build, so that helps in many ways as also. I like the 3 Ps as well: the preserve, the producing, and the protection. But I also believe that 4th P needs to be there, and that's the promise. And the promise needs to say that we are going to do this, but we're going to do this right so the people here have a better quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Council President. I just want to thank you for your leadership on this at COG on our behalf, and for organizing today's conversation, which I think has been really helpful and really instructive, and hopefully will be the beginning of us recommitting ourselves to something that has been a major effort at this council and the previous councils as well. And thank you as well. I think we've been doing a lot of really good work, as was noted earlier, to the Fed committee and to Hans Riemer, Councilmember Riemer, for your leadership on this issue. It's really been an area of focus for me, and I know for all of us, something that I've been particularly interested in. I've got to be honest, the comments by my colleague over here, Councilmember Rice, hit a little close to home with how expensive it is to live in Bethesda. I know from experience. But it's an important point, and I think that too often we get caught up in the question of which, do we focus on the up county or the down county? Do we focus on urban areas or suburban and more rural areas? The answer is yes, because we can't solve these challenges without focusing on all of the areas. And as was noted, I think the focus here is that the activity centers aren't just in particular parts of the county, but they do span north and south in the county, which I think was very thoughtful. And I think it's a really timely conversation we just had, as was noted by Ms. Wright earlier, a really important conversation yesterday, talking not only about missing middle housing, but really focusing on some of the work that is being undertaken by planning, which has been terrific, Ms. Gavoni and others, on getting ready for the general plan update. And so I think we are at this critical moment, not just because of all of us understanding the need for housing and the need to tackle this together as a region, not just alone in this, but we also are taking up the defining planning document and the defining planning vision for what we think our community ought to look like, how we should build it, and how we can make it the community that we want it to be. And if past its prologue, the 1964 general plan really did define how Montgomery County was built, and there are some really important areas of that. In many ways, we were ahead of our time. In some ways, we didn't keep up with our forward-looking approach to development and to housing and to transportation and to growth. And I think this will be a really important piece. But I also think it's important that it's not a private sector or public sector. It's an everybody issue. We can't solve this problem with incentives alone. We can't solve this with subsidies alone. We need to create a marketplace and to participate in a marketplace that drives down the cost of housing, that makes it easier to build housing, that then provides the type of nuanced support from the public sector in order to help things along. And that's, I think, the only way that we're going to be able to approach it. And I think it's important that, rather than just leading with with the example of our power of making it more difficult to do things, that we lead with the power of our example in the public sector. And yesterday at the Fed committee, part of the conversation was the work that's being undertaken to look at public lands and public resources and public properties. And we aren't taking advantage of highest and best use in many of the public properties that we own. Right in expensive downtown Bethesda, we have the Regional Service Center, which is zoned for 200 feet. And it is not the highest and best use, and it is one of the most expensive pieces of real estate in Montgomery County. And that's just one obvious example. We have WMATA properties all over the region that we really need to be putting pressure on our colleagues at WMATA to take advantage of those properties, to make housing a priority, to make mixed-use development a priority. We are investing billions and billions of dollars in this infrastructure, and we ought to be realizing the benefits for the public of the infrastructure we're building. The same thing with the Purple Line, multi-billion-dollar investment, which I think is great, but it only works if we focus ourselves on it. So I'm hopeful that we can take this up, that we can do it in a way that doesn't pit different parts of the county against each other, that doesn't pit the public against the private sector, that brings people together in order to solve these challenges. I don't think we have a choice. I think it's the only thing that we can do is to do it together, and so hopefully we can make that happen. And thank you again to all of you for all of the work that you've done, and I look forward to continuing this conversation and to the leadership that's been shown here at the dais.
Thank you. Councilman Albornoz.
Thank you, Madam President. I think Councilmember Jawando said it well. We could be here all day, but I, for one, am getting hungry. I'm sure many of you are as well, so I will not hold us up for very long. But I just wanted to underscore a couple of points. I really want to commend Mayor Stewart. She has done, I think, a fantastic job along with her community in facilitating what can be a very tough dialogue. And I think that provides an important blueprint for us as we take on an issue that we all acknowledge is complex and does not have a one-size-fits-all approach. And I do want to commend my colleagues and Council President Navarro for the resolution approach to this, acknowledging that this is, we have to build off of the many important steps we've already taken over a number of generations here in the county. And I want to put a plug in for the New Hampshire Avenue Rec Center project, which I think is the perfect example of taking advantage of public land right there on the Purple Line through a public-private partnership that we can maximize its use. And I think it already has a lot of community support. So those are exactly the kinds of projects that we need to look more for across the entire county. And there is one thing that I have not heard yet mentioned, acknowledging there's no one solution to this, but That's senior housing. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had over the last 2 years through the campaign and now in the council with folks who want to downsize, want to be able to take advantage of the equity they've established in their home over a number of years and that they've earned, but don't know where to go. And so that is further exasperating the logjam, because those are homes that families coming in would normally, under a naturally occurring process, purchase to establish. And so I think that is another area we need to continue to invest in so that there can free up more of the limited housing stock that we currently have available. So I look forward to the ongoing conversation and appreciate this and what I'm sure will be many more conversations about this important subject. Gracias.
All right, my other colleague on the COG board, Councilmember Hooker.
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you for your leadership, as everybody's mentioned, scheduling this today. This is a very important and timely topic that we need to take on, and hopefully this will be the first of many conversations we'll have about it, and not just conversations. Hopefully we'll take a lot of action on this score. Thanks to all the staff at the Urban Institute for getting this done. This is a very helpful report. I was very proud to support it as a member of the COG board, and as I said, we have a lot more to do, and the planning staff and Gwen and Lisa as well. You know, other regional governmental bodies have greater authority than COG does. We in the Washington region, each jurisdiction really has its own authority, and our regional body doesn't have that much authority legally, but they have a lot of authority to persuade all of us to do the right thing and to have uncomfortable conversations and lead locally. And this is the perfect role for COG to play. And so I'm really grateful that they have teed up this conversation and provided the thought leadership in this area, because we really do need to hold hands across the Potomac and Western Avenue and do things that individually there are some disincentives to doing, but collectively we all need to get done. So, Mr. Buchanan, thank you for being the lone member of the private sector, as you said here. I really appreciated your remarks, particularly about the Purple Line being a catalytic opportunity to preserve and produce more affordable housing. Can you elaborate on what we should be doing specifically around preserving affordable housing in Purple Line corridors? What do you think we're not doing enough of? What do we need to do more of?
If I could, I would have you contact, JBG is very much involved in a the Washington Housing Initiative, and they've ended up doing more in preservation. This is a big fund that they generated, and their A.J. Jackson is the person who informed me that they found it's easier to preserve than to produce new. So you may want to reach out to them, because those are the projects they're looking at as their initial rollout. And I don't know what criteria they have found, but he would be far more informative than I would on that. I just feel very strongly that it's very telling that for someone who's just raised a lot of money, and I've been one who's contributed to it because I believe in that mission, they found it was easier for them to preserve than produce. That says a lot.
Great. And you also talked about transportation. I appreciate that. Don't turn your light off yet. You talked to the governor quite a bit, and Secretary Ron. Mr. Rice mentioned promises that have, I don't want to say broken, but have not yet been kept, in the Up County in particular. You and I have had a lot of conversations about the governor's plans to widen 270 in the Beltway. What do you think we could be doing, and what do you think the private sector could be doing to get the governor to, A, add more locally serving transit capacity to his 270-495 plan, and also to revert to his previous support, might be too strong, but grudging acquiescence of the CCT project, which has been a commitment that has lasted 20 years across 4 governors, and now that is being broken. So I'd love to know your thoughts on what we could do, what our state delegation should be doing, what our federal delegation might be able to do and what the private sector could be doing to persuade our governor to return to his previous position on the CCT and really go beyond that and embrace it.
There's no question that the business community is very concerned that all the politics continue to talk, but no one's really sitting down and figuring out how we're going to go from point A to point B. Both 270 and the Beltway need to be addressed at the same time. 270 needs to be widened far into Frederick than it is now. My sense of it would be for our delegations to sit down and try to meet with the local government as well as the state government and to some degree the federal government, because if Montgomery is going to carry its weight in the state with the jobs that can be produced, we really have to address this infrastructure now. And it may not be perfect, but I think the business community is saying, let's stop the talk and figure out when the action can start.
Thank you. And as you, I'm sure, know, the council's been very good at keeping our promise in this area. Our committee, and approved by the full council, forward-funded BRT all the way to Clarksburg recently, $3 million for that. And yet, we don't have a partner at the state level. So anyway, I can follow up with you individually, but I'd really like your assistance working with the private sector to make sure we're speaking with one voice to the governor and doing everything we can to get him to return to support of the
We're happy
project.
to be involved. I think, as everybody says, all this is interrelated. You cannot talk about housing without the infrastructure for transportation. You can't talk about attracting the workforce without having workforce development. And that gets into our education system. There's a big challenge for the county, big challenge for our region.
Absolutely. Thank you. Mr. Nagan, thank you for being here. You mentioned state and federal opportunities you think we're missing out on. What are the main ones we're missing? And how are you working with our state delegation to take advantage of DHCD programs in particular that I know the former DHCD secretaries have told me that we're pretty bad at taking advantage of?
Sure. There are a few things which we learned and we did across the river in Fairfax County, Northern Virginia, which I think we can do, replicate, although it will be a long road to travel on, but I think there's a path forward. We can get there. I think we should be recommending separate allocation for 9% tax credits for Montgomery County, being the high-cost area in the region. If you look at Montgomery County, probably in terms of what we provide, the revenues to the state, we don't get that much in return. And that's the argument we made in Virginia with our political leadership, and we finally got there. I think that's one thing we should address. There are other things in terms of how their soft financing gets used. There's some opportunities over there to tweak that process. There's some opportunities in terms of their overall timeline and what they look for in terms of, I don't want to get too granular here, but there are things like twinning 9%, 4% transactions within the same transaction, where the process can be made better and the expectations in terms of looking at the project in totality and not looking at 4% happening 3 or 4 years down the road. So there are a few things that we can address. I'm meeting with the folks from the state end of this month, and we are going to submit our own comments on the draft QAP, which is supposed to come out in the next couple of weeks. So very soon we're going to submit our comments to the state, and we're going to, when we meet with the state, we'll emphasize on these points as well. And then in terms of the delegation, as you heard on different occasions, you are hearing the same theme in terms of what our delegation should be working on in terms of Montgomery County recommendations. So that will be the next step, to work with our OIR office in the county and to work with the state delegation and up to the governor's office to make things happen.
Okay, thank you. And Mayor Stewart, let me just add my voice to the chorus of thanking you for your leadership on this tough issue, and look forward to future work together. And It's glad to hear about your commitment and the council's anticipated commitment tomorrow night. Thanks.
All right, well, once again, really appreciate all of you for taking the time to come and discuss this with us. There is no doubt that I think there's a lot that's already happened. There's a lot that we have put in place, but I am really convinced that these, new targets will provide a boost for all of us to hold hands and continue to make those very important, albeit difficult decisions to get us closer and closer to that target and perhaps even go, beyond. So we will obviously be involved in a lot more conversation, a lot more discussion about the details, but I think this is a great start. So thank you so much for being here. Okay, very quickly, we do have two bills for introduction. Item 4A is Bill 33-19, Police Community Policing, lead sponsors Councilmember Navarro and Rice, co-sponsors Hucker, Albornoz, Jawando, and Friedson. Public hearing is scheduled for January 21st at 7:30 p.m. I want to thank my colleague, Councilmember Rice, for working alongside and the two of us introducing this bill. I want to share a little bit of context. There is no doubt that we have had a lot of conversations this year, particularly throughout the process of selecting a new chief for our police department. And there were community forums that were held, and there was just a lot of conversation about what exactly would we looking for the next chief of police for our esteemed police department. And coincidentally, in one meeting that I held, that I had with the leadership of our FOP, Lodge 35, one of the things that came up was the notion that in Montgomery County, in the past, under different administrations, there was a very robust community policing program that was easily identifiable and that everybody understood and everybody was on the same page and felt really good about the outcomes and about that framework. But they observed that that wasn't necessarily the case in recent years and believed that it was something that we needed to strengthen. And it was interesting because I felt like this was one of those win-wins where the community was saying, we need to strengthen our community policing practices. FOP was saying, yeah, we do need to strengthen our community policing practices. Even when we had a session with Acting Chief Jones, he acknowledged that we needed to strengthen our community policing practices. So I shared with Mr. Cook at that meeting that, perhaps we need to then look at this in a very structural way and enshrine this in the code that Montgomery County is a jurisdiction that will basically operate under a community policing framework that is well defined and that everybody then understands what the expectations are, so that it is not something that perhaps gets implemented sometimes and sometimes it doesn't. And so I want to acknowledge the leadership of FOP for working with me on this bill. I will acknowledge that there are some particular reporting requirements that they felt didn't necessarily need to be included because that information is already shared. Some of it is already available, and what I said to them was, once it gets to committee, obviously we will have an opportunity to go through all of this, and if there indeed are some particular areas that are already widely available and we don't need to include in the bill, maybe as part of the regulation, then that is fine. This is how we do our work when it comes to the legislative process. But I do believe that this will be, again, a very important component, especially as we await the official transmittal of Acting Chief Jones to be considered for confirmation of an appointment. I think this is a really good time for us to be able to clarify what we mean about community policing writ large. So again, thank you to my colleagues for co-sponsoring, and let me turn it over to my co-lead sponsor, Councilmember Rice.
Well, Council President Navarro, you actually summed it up really, really well, and so I don't have that much to add beyond the fact that I really want to thank Captain Sonia Pruitt, who's been doing a great job of ensuring that while there was some angst and inequities in terms of some people being allowed to participate in doing community policing activities while others didn't, really spearheading and making sure that that was open to more people. And I just attended, and it's timely. This past weekend, I was on Friday evening, was at the Soccerplex for Goals Against Cancer, which was our police officers taking on regional coaches in a soccer match designed to raise awareness and raise money for cancer research. But in addition, also created a great opportunity for our police to network and coalesce with our community. And this is just one example of the great things that are happening in our community throughout. The problem is that there's not consistency and there's not that general support, as you noted too, that had been there before. This is really an opportunity for us to showcase to the community what goes on and how dedicated our officers are to really, truly being a part of the community and making a difference and really establishing better relationships with our community as a whole. I've seen it. I've seen some of the officers who are doing a great job, and we need to do more of it. And so I think that this bill will allow us to do just that, and I really want to thank you for your leadership on this.
Thank you. Councilmember Joando.
Thank you, Council President and Councilmember Rice, for your leadership on the bill. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor. I think, we're dealing with many issues, and as we try to figure out what 21st century policing looks like in a whole holistic number of ways, but I think everyone agrees that community policing is a key component and plays a critical role in facilitating interactions with the public that are based on trust and based on mutual understanding and really co-producing policing in communities. I think it's timely as we're getting ready to consider a new chief, as we are mourning the loss of Tay Jefferson in Fort Worth, Texas, this week from last weekend, where unfortunately lost her life. These community policing tactics and philosophy, really, not even tactics, philosophy is so important. And so I look forward to working with the Council President and Councilmember Rice and all my colleagues to make sure that we get this bill right and have it be part of the many things we need to do to make sure we build trust with our law enforcement community. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
I'd like to be added as a co-sponsor.
Thank you. Councilmember Katz.
As would I, please.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
I would also.
Thank you. Okay, great. All right, now on to item 4B. This is introduction of Bill 34-19, Taxation Development Impact Taxes, Affordable Housing, Housing Impact Fairness Act. Lead sponsor, Councilmember Glass. Co-sponsor, Councilmember Joando. A public hearing is scheduled for December 3rd at 7:30 p.m. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Madam President. Picture it, Montgomery County, 2019. There are 164,000 students enrolled in the Montgomery County public school system, a record for our school system. This increase is exerting pressure on our classrooms, as 4 school clusters are currently in a building moratoria as a result of the increased enrollment. At the same time, Montgomery County is facing an affordable housing crisis. According to the Washington Metropolitan Council of Governments, 23,100 units of low-income housing will need to be built over the next decade. The affordability crisis has hit our younger residents particularly hard, as the homeownership rate among 18 to 35-year-olds in Montgomery County has fallen from 45% to 28% over the last 30 years. So with that as the backdrop, today I am introducing the Housing Impact Fairness Act. This legislation closes a loophole so that all new housing structures, specifically newly rebuilt homes, also known as teardowns, contribute to our growing infrastructure needs of increasing school capacity and providing more resources for affordable housing programs. Had these fees been fairly applied to the 2,000 homes that received demolition permits over the last decade, the county would have received $100 million to support our growing infrastructure demands. The Housing Impact Fairness Act will add an estimated $5.7 million toward school construction and $4.3 million toward affordable housing initiatives every year. When a studio apartment is built, an impact fee is assessed. The same for a one-bedroom or a townhouse. But newly rebuilt homes are currently exempt. I don't think that is fair or equitable, especially given the county's data showing that student generation rates of newly built homes are 20% higher than other older single-family homes. Yet we charge impact fees on studio and one-bedroom apartments, which have the lowest student generation rates. The county began collecting impact fees on new development in 1986. Of the 390,000 housing units in Montgomery County today, approximately 2/3 were built before 1986 and never directly contributed to the impact fund. So what are we talking about when we say newly rebuilt homes? According to the planning department, the average home that is torn down was built in 1948, is 1,700 square feet, and sells for $700,000. The new home that replaces it is on average 4,200 square feet and sells for $1.75 million. These are new homes with new pipes, new nails, new roofs, and new foundations. And according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, the word demolish means, quote, to tear down, to do away with. So there should be no confusion that these newly rebuilt homes are in fact new and should be treated as all other new homes. It's equally as important to say what this legislation will not do. This legislation does not apply an impact fee to any home that has already paid one. It does not charge an impact fee for anyone who wants to build an addition, an extension, a dormer, or a bump out. This legislation simply creates a more fair system where new homes are assessed an impact fee to support our growing infrastructure. Here in Montgomery County, we live in a beautiful community. People want to live here because of our high quality of life and the inclusive values we uphold. The demand to live here is so strong that the median price of a home that sold in July of 2019 was the highest July level since the Great Recession. And sellers are getting prices that they're asking for, with an average sales contract going for 98% of the original list price. I have no doubt that people will continue building their dream homes here in Montgomery County while also supporting our growing infrastructure needs. And finally, to my colleagues and to the engaged residents of Montgomery County, I look forward to a robust conversation about this legislation as we find ways to tackle the two most pressing issues of our day: school capacity and housing affordability. Because at its core, this legislation is about housing, schools, and fairness. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Council President, and I want to commend Councilmember Glass on introducing this important legislation. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor. I hope we add many more. It's so on time and on point that we just you're introducing this bill today, right after we talked about the lack and need for more affordable housing in the region, and how that missing middle and those new starter homes, or if you're a senior, how you're going to get into that level of housing. And I think it is about fairness. We were able to put just about $5 million in our housing fund this year. I think it was great that we did that. The fact that this bill has the opportunity to produce close to that amount of revenue each year so that we can produce more affordable housing with our partners is a big deal. The other half going to our school improvements, which we know we have serious capacity. So I think this is an innovative, creative solution to a very complex problem. It's not a silver bullet, but it's going to make every type of housing fair, and again, I think will be one of the many things we need to do to move in the right direction on affordable housing. So I want to commend you and proud to be a co-sponsor.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to recess for lunch. We'll be back at 1:30 for public hearing. Thank you.